Book number two of the Great American Read, going in alphabetical order. The ones I've read is A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, written in 1963, published in 1980. And there is quite a story behind that because John Kennedy Toole was really a child prodigy writer. He wrote his first novel, The Neon Bible, at age 16, which he hated, but he kept going and eventually came up with another one, A Confederacy of Dunces, which he sent out to all the publishing places he could find, and none of them wanted it. And all of that rejection combined with what was probably some other real mental issues ended up with him killing himself. He was 31 years old, which is younger than I am now. And I just keep thinking of this story from time to time just to remind myself how insanely unfairly lucky I was to have my book accepted as fast as it was. Like I basically just sent a publisher the manuscript completely cold, and they liked it, and they agreed to print it, and that was it. But that just does not happen very much in this industry, and what happened to John Kennedy Toole is one of the worst cases of that. And the reason we actually have the book to enjoy now is his mother was bound and determined to get it published when she found a copy. And it took her a decade of trying even more publishing places and like giving her whole story about it. And finally it worked, and it got out in the world, and people liked it, and it won a Pulitzer. And even if the book sucked, how can you not be moved by that? That is a parent going truly above and beyond. And as for the book itself, this is going to seem like a weird digression, but bear with me. In the DVD commentary for the Ghostbusters movie, the first one, Harold Ramis says his favorite review of the movie was at the line, "The entire thing is like a perfectly told joke." And to me, that's a Confederacy of Dunces. It's all just this one big clockwork joke that builds and builds and builds and finally pays off, and it is so worth the wait to get there. And the closest thing I can think of to describe it, to, at least structure wise, is the early Guy Ritchie movies. If you've seen Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels or Snatch, you know that this kind of thing I'm talking about, where you just have this group of like very interesting, quirky characters who may not have that much to really do with each other, but they're all thrown together in this like one area. So it's kind of this story soup with different ingredients bouncing off each other in probably, ideally, very unexpected but very sensical ways until it all comes together in the big climax, which is definitely the highlight of the book, but getting there is a lot of fun too. It's set in New Orleans, where John Kennedy Toole lived, and it's very obvious he had a real love of this city and a knowledge of all the working parts of it. And I've never been there myself, but you just get this sense of a place that is lived in and has all this culture in it, and all this like wacky stuff that can just happen. And from what I've heard, that's not very far off the mark. So, probably I will head there one day. But for now, we have this book, and like that's really one of the best things books can do. They transport you somewhere. Maybe you'll never go, but you still can feel like you've been there. And our main character is Ignatius J. Riley, who is this incredibly overweight and like arrogant kind of hipster, even though the term didn't really exist at the time, because he thinks human culture as a whole took a downturn somewhere around like medieval times, and he thinks that the whole world is just full of all these crappy people doing crappy things, and we should go back to the way it was back then. I'm sure that can sound familiar to someone just about everyone knows. Maybe some people say that about me. I don't know. But uh, his whole thing is that kind of the Archie Bunker effect, where This guy is, by any intellectual measure, not a very likable person, but they just go about everything they do with so much panache to them that you just can't help but want to see more of them. And I can kind of understand why this book was rejected so much because it, as hipster in itself as it may sound to say, it's not really designed to be likable. And you have Ignatius J. Riley just being a jerk to everyone and ending up doing a bunch of good things completely by accident and not really caring about any of it. But he's still like he has this wit to him, and just how sheerly arrogant he is really funny a lot of the time. But in case that doesn't really do it for you, there's still a whole bunch of other much more sympathetic characters for you to hang on because they all are going through a bunch of crap that Riley rescues them from. And again, like not meaning to at all, but it's still nice to see what happens to them. And you can like them all and root for them, and you see them get pulled out of the trouble they're in, and it really does feel good. But for all of that, the real draw of the book for me is just the way the plot mechanics work. And it's something that lends itself very well to rereadings where you can just see every piece being set up and how they all function together. It's like gears in a clock. And if John Kennedy Toole had lived longer and been able to write more stuff, maybe he could have even improved on this, which would have been amazing to see. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, and this is all we have of him. Plus, his first book, The Neon Bible, which was published after Confederacy of Dunces was such a success, but which he probably would not have approved of, but it's nice to have anyway. Um, this is really a book of pure entertainment, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. It's really one of the funniest things you'll read, and even if you don't like the main guy, there is plenty more there to chew on, and maybe you'll even come up with a bigger appreciation for a city you might be unfamiliar with. Um, that's it for this book. Next, we go back a bit further to something that probably everyone has read, but even if you have, it's maybe time you took a look back. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland.